The stars had always been silent, but tonight their silence felt heavier than ever. Captain Elias sat alone on the wide observation deck, staring into the endless black sea of space. Around him the ship hummed faintly, a soft vibration that reminded him it was alive, still carrying him forward, still refusing to give up. Outside the glass, millions of stars glittered like frozen embers, distant fires that whispered of worlds he would never see. Once, long ago, he had known the names of constellations. Once he had looked at the sky and seen home. Now there was only a cold emptiness. Earth was gone. It had burned away in a war that no one had truly won. Every human carried the ashes in their chest, and Elias carried them more heavily than most. He was captain not because he sought command, but because there were too few left who could lead, too few who could shoulder the weight of survival. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight, as if in prayer. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered. Hollow eyes, lines that grief had carved deeper with every year. He thought of the crew, his scattered family, sleeping in their bunks. Each of them carried wounds, seen and unseen. They all looked to him for strength, yet tonight he had none left to give. He whispered, though no one could hear, "Why are we still out here? What are we fighting for?" The hum of the ship gave no answer. For a moment, Elias closed his eyes. He tried to remember the warmth of a home-cooked meal, the laughter of a crowded street, the smell of rain on Earth's soil. But memory was cruel. It offered him only shadows, blurred faces, and voices he could not recall. They slipped away from him like sand through his fingers, leaving nothing but aching emptiness. He thought he was alone in his sorrow. He thought the night belonged only to him and the stars. But he was wrong. Soft steps echoed at the far end of the deck. Elias turned his head, startled, half expecting one of his human crew. Instead, he saw her. Elira. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. Her kind were alien, both beautiful and strange, with smooth scales that shimmered faintly like glass under light, and eyes that reflected silver as though they carried their own moons inside them. To most of the crew, she was a translator, a link between broken species and fragile alliances. But to Elias, she was something more, though he had never dared put it into words. Elira moved with the careful grace of someone stepping into sacred ground. Her head was bowed slightly, her long cloak brushing against the metal floor. She stopped a few steps away from him and tilted her head, studying him in silence. "You are not resting," she said softly. Her voice carried an accent, each word pronounced with care as if the language was fragile in her mouth. Elias managed a tired smile. "Couldn't sleep." Her silver eyes flickered with something unreadable, concern perhaps, or sorrow of her own. She came closer, but slowly, as though she was afraid she might break the fragile quiet that wrapped around them. Without asking, she lowered herself into the seat beside him. For a long while, neither spoke. They simply sat there staring at the endless sea of stars. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with unspoken things, with grief neither dared to voice, with comfort neither knew how to offer. The only sound was the soft hum of the ship, steady and patient. Elias thought of moving, of standing to leave, but something held him in place. Perhaps it was the way her presence filled the room, soft and steady like a heartbeat. Perhaps it was the knowledge that she too carried loss. Her world had burned in the same war that had taken Earth. She was not only an alien crewmate, she was a mirror of his pain. The longer they sat, the heavier his chest felt. But also, strangely, the lighter, as if the very act of not being alone in the silence made the weight more bearable. And then, quietly, without warning, she shifted closer. Her movement was so gentle he almost didn't notice at first. Her arm brushed his sleeve, her shoulder just barely touched his. And in that fragile closeness, something in him stirred. He froze, uncertain, but he did not pull away. In the cold silence of the stars, Captain Elias realized something he had forgotten for a long time, that even in grief even in exile. No one was meant to face the night alone. Elias felt her presence before he fully understood it. The soft sound of her footsteps, careful and almost hesitant, drew his attention from the dark void outside the observation deck. He didn't need to look up to know it was Lyra. She had a way of moving that was both graceful and deliberate, like every step was measured against some invisible scale. For a moment he almost held his breath, as if any sudden movement might startle her away. She stopped a few feet behind him, her head bowed slightly. Her silver eyes shimmered faintly, in the soft glow of the deck lights reflecting both curiosity and uncertainty. For years Elias had faced enemies, storms, and impossible decisions, but he had never encountered someone who could convey so much without saying a single word. Tonight, he realized, she was not just looking at him, she was seeing him. "You are still awake," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It carried a strange weight, one that demanded attention without demanding anything. "I could say the same about you," he replied, trying to sound casual, though his voice came out rougher than intended. The hum of the ship suddenly felt louder, pressing against the quiet between them. Lyra's lips curved slightly, the faintest hint of a smile. She shifted, and he noticed how her scaled skin caught the light, shimmering like water in a moonlit pond. For a moment, Elias forgot the endless void outside, the destroyed worlds, the aching loneliness. She was here. She was alive. And in that presence, the cold darkness of the universe seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, almost tentatively, she approached him. Her steps were measured, respectful, as if seeking permission with every inch she covered. Elias wanted to speak, to ask her, to stop, to reassure himself that this was not a dream, but the words lodged in his throat. Somehow he knew that she would not be deterred. Finally, she came to rest beside him, a careful distance away. She did not sit, did not lean. She simply remained there, quiet and still, like a shadow that refused to leave. Elias could feel the warmth radiating faintly from her, a warmth that was strange and comforting at the same time. "You look tired," she said after a moment, her voice soft, almost hesitant. There was no judgment in it, no pity, only observation, simple and real. "I am," he admitted. "Couldn't sleep. Too much thinking. Too many ghosts." She tilted her head as if she understood without needing an explanation. And then, in a gesture so small he almost missed it, she leaned just a little closer. Her shoulder brushed his arm, and though it was light, it carried weight. Weight he hadn't realized he needed. For a long time they sat in silence. The stars outside continued their silent vigil, distant and indifferent, while inside the deck, time seemed to slow. Elias became aware of her breathing, soft and steady, though slightly uneven at first. He realized that she too carried burdens he could not see, griefs that mirrored his own. The universe had taken much from both of them, yet here they were, surviving, existing in this fragile moment of connection. Her eyes glinting with silver light met his. "You are not alone," she said softly, almost like a statement, not a question. He swallowed hard. The words resonated deeper than he expected. Not alone. He had spent years convincing himself that solitude was the only safe place, that attachment only led to pain. Yet here was someone, alien, distant, yet intimately present, offering comfort without expectation, without demand. Elias reached slowly, almost unconsciously, and let his hand brush against hers. She did not pull away. Instead, she shifted, slightly closer as if answering an unspoken invitation. His chest tightened, not from fear but from the strange, tender warmth that spread through him. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of peace amidst the lingering shadows of loss. "You trust me," he said quietly, barely daring to break the silence. She nodded slightly, a faint gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of honesty. And in that small nod, Elias felt a connection he could not name, a bond forged in shared loneliness, in mutual understanding, in quiet courage to face the universe together. Outside, the stars continued to shine, indifferent and eternal. But inside the observation deck, something new had begun. Two souls once lost to grief and fear had found a fragile bridge between them. And though the night was still, though the universe remained vast and unforgiving for the first time in a long time, Elias felt that he did not have to face it alone. And Elira, leaning just a fraction closer, seemed to feel it too. The hum of the ship seemed louder now, or perhaps Elias just noticed it more. Every vibration, every faint pulse of energy beneath the floor reminded him that the world outside, the endless, indifferent stars, kept moving, whether they were ready or not. But for a moment on this quiet deck, nothing mattered beyond. The small, fragile presence beside him. Elira shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing against his once more. This time the contact was deliberate, a small acknowledgement of trust. Her scales glimmered softly under the dim deck lights, catching the reflections in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. Elias could feel her trembling, tiny movements that betrayed fear, exhaustion, and perhaps something deeper, something he could not name. "You don't mind?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ship's soft hum. There was a vulnerability in it, a quiet plea that made his heart tighten. He shook his head, swallowing hard. "No, I don't mind." The words felt inadequate, but he hoped they conveyed truth. He had spent years telling himself to remain distant, to keep grief contained, to avoid attachments that could break like glass. Yet here she was, leaning against him, offering something simple yet profound. Trust. Slowly, almost instinctively, Elias extended a hand. He let it hover near her, then gently rested it on hers. Her fingers, slender and delicate beneath the shimmering scales, responded without hesitation. The warmth of her touch was unlike anything he had expected. Cool, yet alive, grounding him in the present, reminding him that despite everything lost, connection was still possible. For a long while, they simply sat, hands touching, shoulders brushing, breathing in sync. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with shared understanding. Neither had to speak. Words were unnecessary when presence alone said more than any conversation ever could. You are different from what I expected," Elias finally said, his voice soft, hesitant. "Your people. I thought you would be distant, cold. But you—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Words always seemed to fail in moments like this. Elira tilted her head, her silver eyes glinting with something he could not read. "We are many things," she admitted. "But tonight, I only wish to be here, with you." Her words were simple, but they carried an honesty that struck deeper than any eloquence ever could. He exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his chest ease. The universe outside remained vast, dark and indifferent. But here, in this small corner of the ship, something fragile and vital had begun to take root. Grief had taught him to fear attachment, to avoid closeness. But he realized now that connection did not erase loss. It made it bearable. It gave pain a place to rest, a companion to share its weight. Elias could feel the faint rise and fall of her chest against his side, the rhythmic pulse of life that mirrored his own. It was an intimacy neither had sought consciously, but it had grown naturally, unspoken, undeniable. He was no stranger to command, to giving orders and taking responsibility. But this was something entirely different. He had never felt responsible for someone in this way before. Not in the tactical sense, not in the duty-bound sense, but in a human sense. And she, it seemed, was placing her trust in him entirely. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. He knew that to accept her trust meant to open himself fully, a risky, vulnerable choice in a universe that had already taken so much from him. But the moment he let the thought linger, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the fragile hope of survival alone, but the deeper, steadier hope of shared presence, of companionship, of quiet understanding. Minutes passed, though they might as well have been hours. Neither spoke, neither moved. The only sound was the hum of the ship, and the slow, steady rhythm of two lives touching in a universe that had tried to convince them both they were alone. Finally, Elias whispered, We will get through this together. Elira's fingers tightened slightly around his, a small, imperceptible squeeze that carried more meaning than any words could. Her head rested just a little closer to his chest, and for the first time in countless years, Elias allowed himself to believe that trust could survive even here, even in the cold void of space, even after so much loss. And in that fragile, quiet moment, two broken worlds found a fragile refuge. Two souls battered by grief and circumstance discovered that even in silence, there could be understanding. Even in darkness, there could be warmth. The night stretched on, endless outside, but here, within the hum of the ship and the softness of shared presence, a small flame of hope flickered. And Elias knew without doubt that no matter what awaited them beyond the observation deck, they had found something worth protecting, worth holding on to, worth trusting. The stars outside continued to shine, indifferent and eternal, as if nothing that had happened, or would happen, mattered to them. Inside the observation deck, however, the air was heavy with unspoken things. Elira shifted closer to Elias, her small, deliberate movements revealing a fragility she rarely allowed anyone to see. She had leaned against him before, but now there was a hesitation, a quiet tremor that went deeper than fatigue. Elias noticed it instantly. "What is it?" he asked softly, his hand brushing lightly against hers. He did not demand an answer. He did not push. He only asked. And that was enough. Her silver eyes met his, and for a long moment, there was silence. Then she spoke, her voice breaking the quiet like a fragile thread. "I dream," she said, barely above a whisper. "I dream of fire, of my world burning." Elias felt a pang in his chest. He knew that dream. Everyone who had lost everything knew it. He imagined her home, a world alive with color and life reduced to ash and ruin. The images were vivid in his mind. The destruction, the screams, the empty streets where life had once thrived. And now, she carried those memories inside her, heavy and unrelenting. "I wake," she continued, her voice trembling slightly, "and I am alone. Always alone. Until now." He did not speak immediately. Words felt inadequate. How could he possibly console someone whose grief mirrored his own? He had spent years telling himself that humans were the only ones capable of deep loss, only to learn that pain did not recognize species. It was universal. It traveled across worlds, carried by survivors who had lost everything and everyone. "You are not alone," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "Not tonight. Not ever, if you don't want to be." She blinked, as if surprised that he could say such a thing, or perhaps that someone could mean it with such sincerity. Slowly, she lowered her head to rest lightly against his shoulder. The weight of her grief pressed against him, yet it was not oppressive. It was shared, and shared grief, he had learned, could sometimes feel lighter than grief borne alone. For a while they simply sat, the hum of the ship filling the silence around them. Outside, stars glimmered coldly, but inside warmth began to grow. Not heat from the ship's systems, nor from artificial lights, but from presence, the simple human act of being together in the face of loss. I thought I would never feel safe again," Elira whispered. "After my world fell, after I lost everyone, I swore I would never trust another being, never allow myself to need anyone." Elias tightened his hold on her hand, his thumb brushing over her fingers. In a comforting rhythm, "Trust is not weakness," he said softly. "It's the strongest thing we can do. It means we survive, not just in body, but in spirit." Her breathing steadied slightly at his words. For the first time that night, there was no tremor, only a quiet acceptance that maybe, just maybe, connection was possible again. She let herself lean fully against him, allowing the warmth of his chest to cradle her. They remained like that. Two broken souls bound by loss, each carrying scars that the other could not see. Yet in the quiet of the observation deck, in the fragile intimacy of a simple touch, the world outside, the endless void of space, the ruined planets, the ghosts of the past, faded. There was only this moment, only this understanding, only this fragile bond. "I don't know if the pain ever truly leaves," she said after a long pause. "But maybe it doesn't have to feel so heavy if you share it." Elias nodded, pressing, his forehead gently against hers. "Exactly. That's why we keep going. Not just to survive, but to carry each other when we can't carry ourselves." Her silver eyes glimmered with unshed tears. Elias felt a surge of emotion, protectiveness, tenderness, and a quiet reverence for her courage. She had survived so much already, endured unimaginable loss, and yet here she was, trusting him, leaning on him, allowing herself to rest. Outside, the stars continued their silent watch. Inside, a new understanding took root. Pain had not disappeared, grief had not lifted, but the weight had shifted. Shared grief was lighter, shared sorrow was survivable, and in that quiet corner of a ship drifting through the endless night, Illyra had finally allowed herself to feel a small measure of peace. Elias held her closer. "Rest now," he whispered. "I'm here. You're safe." And for the first time that night, she truly believed him. The soft calm of the observation deck shattered suddenly. A low, warning hum vibrated through the ship, followed by flashing red lights that painted the walls in urgent streaks. Elias's chest tightened. His fingers instinctively went to the console, scanning the readouts, reading the flashing symbols of danger he had memorized countless times. "Enemy contact," the ship's automated voice announced, crisp and mechanical, carrying no mercy in its tone. Illyra stirred beside him, eyes widening as the tension rippled through the air. She had faced danger before, but never like this, never in the silence of space where a single misstep could mean death. Elias rose slowly, guiding her gently behind him. His hand brushed her back, an instinctive gesture of reassurance. "We need to move," he said softly. "Stay close to me." Her silver eyes met his, a mixture of fear and resolve shining in their depths. Though she was smaller, physically fragile compared to him, there was a steel in her gaze he had come to respect. Without hesitation, she followed his lead, moving, as one with him, toward the bridge. The crew was already at their stations, tension tight in the muscles and voices of those who had survived too many battles. Every movement, every order had to be precise. The raiders, a merciless faction of scavengers, had found them. Elias recognized the markings immediately. They were fast, efficient, and cruel. They struck without warning, leaving destruction in their wake. Elias took his seat at the command console, heart pounding, hands steady despite the adrenaline. He issued orders with practiced precision, but his eyes never left Illyra. She had her own console, her own role, translating and decoding enemy transmissions. The bond between them, forged in quiet moments of trust, now became a lifeline in chaos. "Evasive maneuvers," he called. "Shields up to 90%. The ship shuddered as enemy fire struck. Sparks danced along the hull, and the lights flickered briefly before steadying. Outside the reinforced glass, he could see the raiders' ships closing in, sharp and deadly like hawks hunting their prey. Illyra's voice rang out in a language the raiders could understand, harsh, precise, commanding. Elias had never heard her speak like this before. Every word was calculated, every tone measured. She was bending their enemies' perception, making them hesitate, questioning whether the humans and aliens on this ship were a force worth underestimating. Elias felt a surge of admiration and relief. She was not just his companion in silence, she was his ally in battle. They were no longer two separate souls adrift in space. They were partners, connected by trust, shared purpose, and the urgent need to survive. The battle intensified. Lasers, flashed. The ship shook violently and alarms screamed in their ears. Crew members shouted over comms, executing maneuvers with precision born of desperation. Yet in the eye of the storm, Elias noticed something extraordinary. The fear that had once seemed to dominate the deck was tempered by determination, courage, and a quiet, stubborn hope. Illyra's hands moved over the controls, translating, commanding, threatening. The raiders faltered. Their formation broke, and hesitation spread like wildfire among them. Elias saw the opportunity and took it, steering the ship with skill honed through countless trials. Each movement of the enemy ships, each strike aimed at them, was countered. With precision. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the raiders broke formation and fled into the darkness. The ship shuddered one last time as the threat disappeared, leaving only the hum of engines and the quiet of survival. Elias exhaled deeply, muscles relaxing for the first time since the alarms had sounded. He looked at Illyra, standing beside him, eyes glimmering not just with relief but with a quiet, fierce pride. Despite the danger, despite the weight of grief and loss they both carried, she had risen to the moment with courage and grace. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We made it," he said softly. His voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of what they had just faced together. Illyra nodded, allowing a small smile to touch her lips. "Yes, together," she whispered. In that moment, Elias realized something profound. Survival was not just about skill or strategy. It was about trust, about connection, about the unspoken bond that allowed two beings, different worlds, different lives, to face the darkness as one. The stars outside had not changed. They were still indifferent, cold, eternal. But inside, the deck, warmth had returned. Shared courage, shared trust, and the knowledge that they could rely on each other now filled the space. The battle was over, but the bond forged in its fire was permanent. And Elias knew that no matter what came next, they would face it side by side. The red lights faded, replaced by the steady hum of the ship's engines. Outside, the stars returned to their silent vigil, indifferent to the chaos that had just passed. Inside the bridge, however, the tension still lingered, a faint echo of the adrenaline that had coursed through every crew member. Elias remained at his console, eyes scanning the sensors, but his thoughts were elsewhere. On Illyra, standing a few steps behind him, her chest rising and falling steadily now, her hands still gripping the edge of her console. She had been remarkable. He could not stop thinking about how she had spoken in the raiders' tongue, commanding, threatening, manipulating their hesitation with precision and courage. It was a side of her he had never seen before, strong, fearless, unyielding, but it was tempered with something human, something tender. She was both warrior and companion, alien and yet profoundly familiar in her courage. You were incredible," he said softly, turning to her. His voice carried more than admiration. It carried awe, gratitude, and something quieter, deeper, that he could not quite name. Illyra's silver eyes met his, glimmering faintly in the soft lights. A small, almost shy smile curved her lips. "I did what I had to do," she replied. "But I could not have done it without you. You guided us." Elias shook his head. "No, we did it together. You led when I could not reach. We balance each other." His gaze lingered on her, noticing the subtle quiver in her hands, the way she stood slightly closer to him than before. She was exhausted, yes, but she was alive, and that was enough. For now, the ship shuddered gently, a reminder of the minor damage they had sustained. Sparks flickered along one of the external conduits, and alarms reminded them that survival came with costs. Crew members began checking systems, exchanging tired but relieved words, yet Elias and Illyra remained where they were together, sharing the quiet after the storm. "You are not afraid?" he asked after a moment. "Of what just happened, or of what could happen next?" Illyra's gaze softened. Fear is always there, she admitted. But courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing to act despite it. Her words were steady, but her hand brushed briefly against his. Not in hesitation this time, but in a gesture of shared strength, a promise that they face the darkness together. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a strange, comforting fire that had nothing to do with the ship's systems. It was her presence, her trust, the quiet bond they had forged in moments of vulnerability and danger. For the first time in years, Elias felt that he was not carrying the universe alone. He had someone beside him, someone who understood the weight of loss, the sting of grief, and the fragile hope that survived in spite of it all. The bridge grew quieter as the crew settled back into routine, repairing damage, recalibrating systems, preparing for whatever might come next. But Elias did not move. He stood beside Alira, letting himself simply exist in the space between them, letting the rhythm of her breathing anchor him. "I never imagined," he began, then paused, unsure how to continue. Words felt fragile, inadequate, but necessary. "I never imagined I would find someone like you in all this darkness." Alira's eyes glimmered with emotion, something tender and raw. She tilted, her head letting her forehead rest lightly against his shoulder. "And I never imagined I could trust again," she whispered. "But here, I can." The words settled over them like a warm blanket. Elias felt his chest loosen, the tight knot of isolation and grief beginning to unravel. The universe outside remained vast and indifferent, but inside this small corner of a drifting ship, there was connection, and that connection was life itself. Minutes passed in quiet companionship. The battle was over, but its impact remained, a shared understanding that survival required both strength and trust, courage and vulnerability. Elias realized that he had been searching for something beyond mere survival. He had been searching for someone to share the weight of existence with, someone who could see him as he truly was, and now he had found her. As the stars continued to shine, cold and distant, he and Alira stood together, two souls bound not by fate alone but by choice. Choice to trust, choice to care, choice to face the unknown together. And in that quiet aftermath, amidst the hum of engines and the soft flicker of lights, Elias knew something profound. Survival was nothing without connection. And in Alira, he had found a companion, a protector, and perhaps a home for his heart. The ship hummed softly as it glided through the endless black of space. Outside, stars glittered, cold and distant, oblivious to the lives aboard the small vessel. Inside, however, warmth filled the observation deck, a fragile, glowing warmth born of trust, courage, and shared survival. Elias sat in his usual spot, eyes tracing the endless void outside, but he no longer felt the loneliness that had gripped him for so many years. The memories of destruction, the ghosts of Earth, and the countless losses he had carried seemed less heavy now. He was not alone. Not really. Alira stepped forward quietly, her silver eyes reflecting the soft lights of the deck. She had been with him through the night's trials, through fear, through danger, through the quiet pain of lost worlds. And now, in this calm, she approached him with a softness that spoke louder than words.